Are we ready for my data?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I was doing I always prepare for my podcast, but I wanted to particularly prepare for this one because I was asking myself the same question, and I think this is why you're an interesting guy to begin with, but why I was like, I really want to get Mitch on because I want to talk about the labor shortage.
Yeah.
People keep saying labor shortage, especially amongst employers, people that own companies. They're like, man, God damn, it's like really hard to find people right now.
Yes.
So for you Canadians out there, which is basically everyone that listens to the podcast, here's a fun fact if you live in Quebec. So who's the biggest employer in Quebec? By far, it's the government of Quebec. They employ 22.8% of the population, 625,000 people.
Yeah.
To put that into perspective, the next closest company I think was at 50,000 people.
Wow.
Okay, so it's 10x, whatever the next closest thing. An even scarier stat, since the beginning of COVID in 2020 to today, 86.7% of all the jobs created since the beginning of the pandemic in Canada have been through the government, whether that's municipal, whether that's federal, or whether that's provincial. These are statistics from the Fraser Institute of Research. So my theory is that, because if you look at the data,
they're creating a vacuum.
Well, yes, and everyone's working. The labor rate participation is high. I would definitely agree. Baby boomers are retiring. You have the wealth effect. You have a lot of people. It's a big mix of things. You have the wealth effect after COVID. Everyone who owned a house. Joey's from Vancouver. I mean, that's like the most exacerbated example. Vancouver, Toronto.
Yeah.
I mean, over COVID, the value of their home doubled.
Oh,
people take out like home equity lines of credit. They do stuff like that. They're like, you know what? I'm going to retire. They feel wealthier. That's an effect. So you're dropping the actual amount of people that can participate in it. Mm-hmm. And the other biggest competitor after this data here is the government. And if just to repeat it again, I want to like really focus on this. 86.7% of all jobs created since the beginning of the pandemic in 2020 in Canada, the government has provided those jobs. Mm-hmm. This distorts the market completely. And you hear people, when I speak to, we have an office in Ottawa, when Ottawa's a big government town. When you speak to private employers around there, they go, I can't compete with the government. I can't pay the same salary. I can't give a pension for life.
Yeah.
And the government's going to keep offering the pension for life because basically what politician wants to take away someone's pension? That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so they are completely distorting the market. And what ends up happening over time is, you know, if we have now 1 in 5 people in Canada are employed by the government. There's pros, there's cons. There's always a balance. There's government jobs are always going to be available. They're always going to exist. I'm not saying you shouldn't have government jobs. We need government jobs for sure. But typically speaking, the only way, if you're an employer, the only way that you're going to hire someone is if the revenue that this person can generate, you make an assumption that whatever it's going to cost you, they're going to be able to bring in more revenue than the cost. Yeah. That's how the private market works. So you're getting people that adds to productivity. In the government, typically speaking, for a wide array of reasons, most of which because, let's be honest, it's not their money. It's the taxpayers' money. You know, basically that's how government's funded. It's money by the taxpayers. Yeah. Typically speaking, most departments, for every dollar you're putting into it, it doesn't give you more than $1 back in productivity. It's less than $1 of productivity. What ends up happening is if the labor market, if the government keeps employing more people, it's a drag on the economy because it takes more resources to go into paying that. It's not adding productivity to the economy. And where do they get that? They basically have to increase taxes more in other places, whether that's people like you and me on salary, companies that need to pay more corporate tax. Yeah. There's all kinds of ways. So that's one of the contributing factors right now. Where are all the jobs going? They're going, and I'm not saying this is right or this is wrong. This is just, I'm looking at this from a factual standpoint. This is what's happening right now. And I would definitely say that this is part of one of the reasons why people in the private market, in the private economy, companies like mine and companies like Aerotek, why we're having difficulty finding labor.